Hello, in this video for Social Problems class, we are going to look at education, the education system, concepts that relate to the education of people and individuals worldwide and at home. And so I have a couple videos in this folder that I have made for you myself, and there are also some curated videos for you in this folder about education so that you can understand what some of the solutions are that have been proposed for the social problems that are perceived in the education system in the United States, but also worldwide. So there's a lot of different points of view to take when you're looking at this topic. And so we're going to start locally, but then also look globally at some issues in educational attainment, which can mean either the level of education to which one rises or the ability to participate in education processes to begin with. So, in this chapter, some of the key sections of the textbook that are included in this reading assignment look at the educational system as a social institution in the United States, and it puts a lens of structural functionalism on the education system and also conflict theory on the education system. And so, from a U.S. point of view, when we apply those two macro scale theories with structural functionalism, we really look at the education system for what it is supposed to do. Emphasis on those the tone of voice there when I say the word supposed to do. The education system on a macro scale is designed so that it can complete certain parts of the socialization process that perhaps our families couldn't participate in. It gives cultural diversity, training, and exposure. It also gives cultural competences like our history or common things like the Pledge of Allegiance or knowledge of American history that perhaps our households cannot provide to us. Also, in the education system, according to a structural functionalist point of view, it is supposed to create innovation and opportunities for research and development of new ideas and inventions, new ways of doing things, new discoveries. That's what the education system is supposed to do for society. It does some other unintended things too, from a structural functionalist point of view. For instance, it puts people in contact with other people from the same socioeconomic level. So if you are from a working class neighborhood or a working class city, then that is a certain level of educational attainment, income attainment, occupation type. And so what you're going to do in the education system is meet other people from your similar cultural background instead of mingling with people from the middle class or the upper middle class. You will probably end up with a life repeating the same socioeconomic level that your parents gave to you in your ascribed status when you were born or adopted into that household. You will probably have initiatives in your local education experience that are sponsored by local industries. And of course, they have a vested interest in training another workforce, right? Not training people for other fields, to move away or to increase their social position. But there's a lot of outside influences on the education system. Funding for education, for instance, comes from the tax base of an area. So if you live in a depressed area where real estate is not valued very highly, then the tax base that comes back to your in the form of funding the education system in your area is not going to have the same value. You're not going to have the same value of funding in the education system in a real estate depressed area than if you are in an area with high valued real estate where the property taxes are significantly higher, and therefore the tax base that goes to education in that area is also much, much more. And so there's all sorts of things that happen, negative, unexpected outcomes of the education system from a structural functionalist point of view. And it's usually those unintended consequences that are perceived from the lens of structural functionalism can be perceived as problematic, and therefore issues can be introduced, initiatives can be introduced to try to bridge those gaps. For instance, kindergarten was not something that was required when I was that age. First grade was when everybody began school. And if you went to kindergarten, it was because your family could afford to pay the tuition someplace that offered a kindergarten program. Public schools didn't offer it. Nowadays, it would be very unusual to find a public school that did not include kindergarten, and many of them have expanded even earlier in life to a pre-3 program. And so these kinds of expansions in the education system are answers to some of the perceived problems from a functionalist lens. From a conflict theory point of view, remember with conflict theory, we're always looking at the struggle between the haves or the have-nots. And in conflict theory, from a macro scale, you have the criticism that education is designed by the people who are in power in society, and therefore their point of view can be presented as factual. It can be presented as the only way to go among the people who are being educated. There's a topic called cultural imperialism in your reading assignment, and this cultural imperialism in education is the idea that the dominant group's point of view is what's going to be presented in the education system, and therefore people who are educated with that point of view will learn by default to repeat that same culture in their adult lives, and will repeat those same lessons with their children, so that it enables people in power, the dominant culture, the dominant ideology, to stay that way, dominant, instead of being able to transition or to include larger swaths of the population. Education is seen as something that is supposed to empower people in order to improve themselves, but conflict theorists critique this based on the fact that the government controls the education system, and therefore the messages in the education system. And that basically, if the structure of the government, if you analyze that as being dominated by the haves and the people who go through the education system as the have-nots, then you've got a problem there, because that controlling force can just recreate the haves and have-nots for future generations. So this cultural imperialism idea is definitely something that in Western culture we blame on the Europeans. We blame on the conquistadors and the people who came to the New World to colonize. We blame the Catholic Church and things like this that are responsible for the pattern of education that exists in this new world of ours. It doesn't seem so new to us. We live here, but this is the pattern of history that created this education system that we have in the United States. You can also look at gender inequality in education within the United States. However, you must do that with a very different point of view than if you were looking at gender attainment of education worldwide. In the United States, you can look at things called hidden curriculum, or mechanisms to recreate those traditional gender roles that you can find in society at large. So the gender roles that typically send males towards STEM fields and females toward liberal arts fields, these are kind of the forces that conflict theorists will cite as a hidden curriculum that repeats gender roles in society. So males are the haves and females are the have-nots. And so there's many different ways that you can look at inequality in the education system, many different perceptions that you can make from many different points of view. You can look at wealth versus poverty, the households from which the children come, what kind of resources are available in those households, because on the first day of kindergarten, there are some expectations that teachers have. In the next video that you're going to watch that I made a few years ago for a sociology class, we're going to meet an impoverished family in Mississippi, and it's going to show you some of their household life experiences, how it is that they live in poverty, but it's also going to illustrate the fact that the adults who supervise the children at home are illiterate. They also don't have electricity. They don't have resources like a television to bring in other agents of socialization for the children to learn from these other sources of socialization. So if you have an illiterate household, then on the first day of kindergarten, the children are not not going to have been read to ever. You're not going to have someone who can read a bedtime story, and there's probably not going to even be somebody with a library card in the household, because it's not seen as essential, or it's not highlighted at all, maybe because of embarrassment or because of that distance that illiterate people sometimes feel like they don't belong in the larger population, or they don't place a value on the kinds of things that the education system offers. And so in that next video that you're going to watch, it's from an HBO documentary, Lolly's Kin, The Legacy of Cotton. You'll see the household life, growing up in a household with illiterate folks all around you, and the struggles that the education system in the area has to go through when they're supposed to be held to the same standards as everybody else in a nationwide education system. But the struggles of the kids at home are so, well, they're not insurmountable, but they are so difficult to overcome that it maybe takes 6 months out of the school year to just overcome the poverty issues before you can start focusing on reading, writing, and arithmetic in the area. You can look at the way that industry is not attracted to an area because if the education system is poor, then companies aren't going to locate there, because where would the kids of their educated employees go to school? There wouldn't be a place if the school is low achieving. And so a conflict theorist would even point to the fact that the same standards are used every single place, with the assumption that kids are going to come to school on the first day of kindergarten and know the difference between blue and orange and yellow and purple. Some kids don't know those differences. Some kids have never been read to. Some kids have never had a mother with a phone number before. There's not electricity in the house, and there's not a steady phone number. And so even if a kindergarten teacher asks a child for a phone number, they can't say it. They don't know how to respond, and that person might get labeled as a remedial student who needs developmental courses, when in fact their brain is fine. It's just a cultural difference, that expectation, that assumption that somebody's going to have steady services at the house, like electricity or a telephone, in order to be able to participate in society based on the standards that we expect among our population. It can be an eye-opener, I think. And so please look at that video from like a global mindset, meaning we're going to look at not only the social stratification, the poverty, conditions of living in poverty, but also how your family's predisposition about education. Are they educated or not? If they're not, are they at least literate? If they're not, do they have any kind of value that they put on education with their children, so that their children can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, so to speak, which is like the USA way to be, right? You're supposed to be self-sufficient and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is the old-fashioned saying that you've probably heard your grandma and grandpa say at some point. And so those are some of the perspectives, some of the points of view that you can use to examine the United States education system. And education systems exist worldwide. One of the videos that I've curated for you looks at educational attainment and how students from the US and the UK compare to other students in other countries. And places like Korea and Japan and Finland and other countries have much higher educational attainment than the students in the United States. And so you have social theorists that perceive that this is the most significant problem, and how do we change that educational attainment so the United States can move from 13th or 14th place, whichever they are, to number one in the world, because we're 13th or 14th place in comparison to the countries who submit data to these research studies. Okay, so that's one way of looking at educational problems worldwide, but a more basic educational problem worldwide from a worldwide point of view is that so very many countries worldwide see education as something that only males should or need to participate in, because traditional gender roles of the female being the mother, the caretaker, the wife, the homemaker, these are the valuable behaviors that are expected from the female as a master status. Your sex category female is a master status, and worldwide in many, many places that designates that your purpose in life is to have babies, take care of those babies, take care of your mother-in-law, take care of your husband, take care of other people within the household. This is your job. And so many places in the world do not bother to educate women at all. Many women worldwide are illiterate into their adult life and never gain literacy skills, because culturally those skills are not necessary for the job duties that women are supposed to fulfill in those societies. And so many cultures around the world that do have education systems only allow or only expect males to participate in those resources and the educational resources that are available. In some countries that welcome women into the classroom, perhaps your family will encourage you to go from, say, first grade until maybe fifth grade. But as long as you are old enough to start working and participating in the livelihood of your household, then quite often about fifth grade is the limit that some people will allow for females to participate in the education system. And so certainly by around the eighth grade, that's when most eighth grade age, is when a lot of women worldwide, you and I wouldn't even call an eighth grader a woman yet necessarily, but a lot of women worldwide are expected to marry, to have an arranged marriage, and are expected to start fulfilling that job function, that purpose in that society. And so worldwide, educational attainment, as far as like the achievements that students collectively make, that's one way of looking at it. But if you look at the division, the sex division within a society, and education is something that males are supposed to focus on and females are not, this is another worldwide perceived problem with education. Also, education might be available in an area, but if you are so entrenched in absolute poverty conditions, like we witnessed in videos in previous weeks, if you're so entrenched in absolute poverty, meaning you do not have a steady supply of food, proper shelter, or clean water to keep you alive from day to day, then often the fatalism in your outlook on life, the stress, the issues that you have to face just to try to survive another 24 hours, this is a mindset that does not include any kind of window for education to be introduced. Fatalism is a mindset that does not allow anybody to even fathom the notion that you could improve your situation. And certainly when there's not enough food to keep you alive, or you have babies dying because the water resources around you are so contaminated, their immune systems can't combat the diseases that they are exposed to in the water supply, like we saw in a previous video. There's often so many other more urgent social issues on somebody's mind that education, and certainly investing in a macro scale education system, is not something that is top of the list. It's, we would be lucky if it was the top 10 in the top 10 priorities for some societies and some communities worldwide, because of those absolute poverty conditions that we find so very often. Okay, so while you're reading the pages that are indicated in the weekly folder, please keep these points of view in mind. And also, some of the videos that I've curated for you, the next one you're going to hear me talk about Lolly, her family in Mississippi that lives in relative poverty. They live in relative poverty, not absolute poverty. But you're going to see the issues that the education system faces based on the home life of the kids in that video. And then you'll also hear about some solutions that people have had over the years. A particularly famous kind of hero of mine, Geoffrey Canada, is his name, and you'll read about the Harlem Children's Zone that he envisioned and created. It's been around for decades now, but there is a video from 60 Minutes. It's probably a decade old itself, and you'll read that video or you'll see that video to introduce you to the Harlem Children's Zone and look at some other curated videos that have to do with education on the local, state, federal, and even worldwide level. So I look forward to your reaction papers this week, and please text me with questions.